So I'll repeat that just since I just started recording. A reinforcer is going to increase the probability or strength of a behavior that it follows. The best way to think about that is when you get rewarded for a behavior, that reward is the reinforcement, and that's what increases the chances of you doing it again. Okay, so if I give you $1 every time you go to class, it increases the probability that you go to class and the strength of the behavior. You get to the point where you just don't even think about it anymore. Okay, you just go to class because you're going to get your $1 and you'll go, and hey, it's easy money, right? Even if it's not much money. Okay, let's make it $100 every time you go to class. That would increase it even more, right? Now we've got two kinds of reinforcement, and I know this is going to throw people, especially the second part. But I'm gonna repeat a couple of these principles more than once here. We have positive reinforcement. And this one's easy. This one you'll be able to grasp right away. Everybody can. It's because I give you a reward for a behavior. That's positive reinforcement. Okay. If I need you to brush your teeth every morning and every night, then I give you a reward every time you do it. That's a positive reinforcement. Okay. Now, here's where we get into the fun part. We actually have a negative reinforcement. It really would have helped if I put it. Yeah. I'll put a space in there. This is where you make something negative go away, and that increases the chances of improving or increasing or strengthening the behavior. Let's say that your mother nags you to make your bed, okay? And she keeps nagging you until you do. When you make your bed, that negative, noxious nagging goes away. That's the point of negative reinforcement. You're making something unpleasant go away. That's the reward. Just shut up. Okay, make your bed and I'll shut up. So you make your bed and she shuts up. Okay. Never worked for me, but that's the example I use in class. And this is not the same as punishment. Negative reinforcement is designed to increase a behavior. I want you to be able to make your bed every day without me telling you. Okay. I still don't, but it's still the good example. Nobody's here to nag me anymore. Seamus doesn't care. However, what you're trying to do is increase the behavior. If it has the word reinforcement, whether it's positive or negative, you're increasing a behavior. Punishment, by contrast, is supposed to decrease a behavior, not increase it, not strengthen it. So when you get punished for something, it's because somebody wants you to stop doing something. I want you to stop that behavior. Okay. So they're not the same thing. That's on the test. Okay. So make sure you understand the difference between negative reinforcement and punishment. Everybody clear on that at this point in time? I guess so. All right, we're going to talk about types of reinforcements. Primary and secondary reinforcers. Primary reinforcers are the ones that come natural. They don't have to be learned. Food is a natural reinforcer. Attention is a natural reinforcer. Especially both of those things, especially if you're working with a dog or probably most any animal, those come natural to them. I don't know that cats respond to attention all the time, but dogs certainly do, right? Seamus, all I have to do is say his name. He looks up expectantly. He knows that something might happen, like I might lean over and pet him. So he looks up and he gives me that cute face of his, and I have to pet him just because he has a cute face. I want him to continue having a cute face, right? Like that's a behavior. I'm kidding on him. But these are natural reinforcers. They're therefore primary. The secondary reinforcers, on the other hand, is a learned one. You weren't born to consider money to be a reinforcer. You had to learn somewhere along the way that money can get you things, right? That if you have money, you can buy things, and that's a reinforcer. You know, you want that new computer from Best Buy. It's going to take money, so money is now a reinforcer for you. But you weren't born to think of money as a reinforcer. And when you really think about it too, is that money is not the same reinforcer from person to person. Some people really aren't married to money, and other people are just absolutely in love with it. You know, it's like that's how they define themselves. And you have other people that say, you know, I need enough money to make a living and get by, but I don't have great material needs. So money's not that big a deal of a reinforcer. I don't need to play the lottery. I don't need that much money, you know. And besides, I'm more likely to lose money than win money on the lottery. It just, the lottery is for people who are bad at math. Okay. Grades are another good example of a secondary reinforcer. Some of you find it hard to live if you make anything less than an A, and others of you will find it that some courses maybe you want to make the A's in, others is not so important, you know. That was kind of me in college. It was like my psychology courses were the ones I want to make A's in, and occasionally I'd take a class outside of my major, which had a good professor, and I'd be motivated to do better there. But I had others. I think I mentioned chemistry. I was like, meh, chemistry. I just got to get by in here. I can grab a C and go. I'm fine with that. So again, the whether a grade is a reinforcer or not is going to depend on maybe how you look at the course, how you look at what you're doing. For those of you who have no intention of going on to maybe to a 4-year school, you just want to make your grades to graduate from here. This is going to be what you want to do. For those of you who want to go into a 4-year school, then maybe the grades are going to be more important, and therefore good grades are more reinforcing. But again, the thing to remember here is secondary reinforcers are learned. They don't come natural to you. You're not born with those. Okay, any question on those before I go on to the schedules of reinforcement? Okay, now what I'm going to talk about here is the way that reinforcements get delivered. If I was to give you a piece of candy for every question you asked in class, every time you asked a question in class, that would be what we call continuous reinforcement. So that was pretty self-explanatory. It's continual. It always happens. Now in life, how often does that happen? If it happens at all, it's pretty daggum rare. All right. And even if you're trying to train an animal, you might start by doing this, but you don't want to stay with that because that's not going to be the best way to get a behavior to stick around. You know, I'll tell you why in just a little bit. Most commonly, though, in fact, almost always, the reinforcers that happen in life are on partial schedules. And we're going to talk about 4 different kinds of these. This means that the reinforcer is not going to come every time you do a behavior. You know, if you work at a job, do you get a paycheck every day? Well, if you work for tips, I guess you do. If you're in a restaurant or you work in an industry where you make tips, yeah, but do you get tipped from every customer? No. So don't you love those ones who stiff you? Okay, so the first type we're going to talk about here is called the fixed ratio. This is where you're going to get a reinforcer for every set amount of behaviors. Has anybody here ever worked on a piece rate type schedule that every time you made 10 objects, you would get paid $1, okay? I actually had this really great part-time job as an undergraduate up in Huntsville for the Huntsville Item. And what I was an inserter. This was the days before, I guess now a small town newspaper didn't have the equipment to assemble the newspaper. So, like if you had a section B and a section A, and there were days when they only had two sections, somebody had to come along and put these two newspapers together. We used to call it slapping papers, because you'd actually pinch the first section and slap the second section in, and the momentum of it would move it to the next stack that way. And we were paid by every 50 papers we would do this with. So, and I forget the rate we worked for at this point in time, but we weren't on the clock. We just had to be there when the papers were coming off the presses so that they could be slapped together and then gone out and delivered. So that was the job we did. And we got paid for every 50 ones we put together, we made some money. So that was how that worked out. We had three of us doing it. We always divided up equally, and it didn't matter the time. If you got really fast, you might be out of there in 15 minutes and make whatever you were going to make at that point in time. Sunday was a bigger paper, and so that would take more time, of course, but we had more sections, and so we got paid more money for it too. But that's what a fixed ratio is. If you have a quota that you have to get so much, if you're a cop and you have to give out so many tickets in order to get a bonus, then that's a good example of a fixed ratio as well. Now, the thing about this is if you're on this kind of schedule, then especially they test these on rats and things, is that they find that when a rat knows that it's going to get a food pellet every 10th time it presses the lever, then what happens is the responding, after it gets the food, it tends to drop off a little bit, and it slowly works its way back up to where it gets closer to that 10th. It's going to start pressing it more often. Okay, so you kind of get this loopy thing in terms of the behavior if you're working off a fixed ratio. Now, we didn't do that with the papers, because the faster we finished, the faster we were out of there, and that was also a reinforcer. Let's face it. Don't you like it when you get off work? Free at last to do what you want to do. So that too is a reinforcer in a situation where you're at work. And even if you're on the fixed ratio, bottom line is sooner you're through, sooner you're out of there. So, all right, then the next type to look at is called the variable ratio. This is where the reinforcers, they're going to happen sooner or later. You just don't know when, you don't know how often. They're just very, very unpredictable and really variable. Okay, they're not based on an average number of times. They're going to happen. If anybody has ever been to a casino and done gambling, heck, if you just played poker at home, it's a real good example of a variable ratio of reinforcement. You don't know when you're going to get the cards. You don't know when the slot machine is going to come through, but it's going to happen. It happens, you see it happening around you, even if it's not happening to you. And it does happen. Sports is another good example of that. Baseball is a wonderful example, because the best hitters are successful maybe 1/3 of the time that they're up. That means 2/3 of the at-bats they go to are failures. But they never know when the next hit's going to come. They never know when the next one's going to be a double or a triple or a home run. They just know that there's a chance it can happen. The thing about this type of reinforcement is it is the best way to get behaviors ingrained, strengthened, and hard to extinguish. All right. And that's why so many people that play sports find it so hard to quit. The reinforcers can still come. You never know when you're going to hit a good shot. You never know when you're going to do something well. You never know when you're going to hit on the slot machine. So when you're training a dog, or any kind of animal for that matter, once you get a behavior started, you don't want to reinforce it every single time. You can do it. Yeah, I still do it with Seamus. Every now and then when we're out in the backyard, and especially dawn and dusk, I go out there with him because he's small, and I worry about great horned owls at dawn and dusk. I'm thinking, there's an amuse-bouche. I'm going to go have me a quick snack. So yeah, I keep him chaperoned. But I don't always tell him good boy every time he goes to the bathroom, but I do it every now and then still. I mean, he's 7.5 years old now. And every now and then I'll just decide, okay, good boy, just randomly, but most of the time I don't. But he never knows when I'm going to say it. And his head always, pops up to look at me. He knows he's getting attention for doing something good. So it's rare, very rare for him to have any accidents inside. And when he does, I'm grateful we have tile and not carpet anymore. So that makes cleanup a lot easier. Those of you who have tile know. Okay. So this one is the best one to get a behavior to be permanent. Okay. All right. Next one to mention is going to be based on time instead of performance. This is the first one we look at is called fixed interval. And this is where you get a reward at a fixed amount of time. Your paycheck is based on this. If you get paid once a month, if you get paid twice a month, if you get paid every 2 weeks or every week, that's a fixed interval. You know that the reward is coming at a certain time, it's fixed in time, and boom, there you go. That's how you tell a fixed interval. Most of us are going to get paychecks based on that. Okay, then you have variable interval. And this is where the time can vary, but it doesn't depend on the amount of behaviors that you do. This one's always the hardest one for me to think of good examples on. And yeah, it's like the responding is slow and inconsistent. It's like one of the best examples I've got is the way insurance companies have often paid in the past. They're stricter now than when I first started doing private practice. But it used to be you never knew when you were going to get paid by the insurance companies for the work you did. It's just one day a check would show up. Now, my behaviors of doing therapy would be the same all along. I'm going to see my people normally once a week or whatever the schedule was, but I never knew when they were going to pay for it. It just would show up one day and boom, I would have it. It was just unpredictable, but not based on the behaviors themselves. I'm doing the behaviors, but again, they determined what time interval they wanted to do it. Some of them were so bad. I'll never forget one company used to always say the check's in the mail, and the check would literally be sitting in their mail room for 2 weeks, not going out. But that to them was checks in the mail. Yeah, they ended up losing their contract with the state too. I'm happy to say they were not good to do business with. So, but anyway, that's the variable interval. Any questions over these schedules? These are all good test questions. So you want to know what these schedules are, okay? All right, no questions. I'm moving on. Next principle we're going to talk about, and this is going to sound similar to the classical conditioning. We have generalization. Okay, it is similar to classical conditioning. You remember little Albert wasn't just scared of the little white rats, but other things that might be white and furry, like a white fur coat or a Santa Claus thing. Boy, was that the ugliest Santa Claus mask you've ever seen? That would scare any child, even without conditioning, I think. But when you gave the same response to similar stimuli, most of us, I'm going to guess all of us, really like dogs, if not love them, right? And whenever we see a dog, we are, there's something about a dog. You just kind of go, yeah. Have you ever found yourself when you're driving along and you see somebody just walking along, you look at the person. But if you see them walking a dog or two, do you spend more time looking at the dogs than the people? We tend to do that. Now, generalization to stimuli would be feeling the same way about some, let's say a golden retriever. Who doesn't like a golden retriever? And thinking that you could approach it the same way that, there's a pit bull that's snarling at me. I think I'll approach it the same way. If you did that, that would be called generalization of stimuli, okay? That's something that's similar to something you trust. would be something that you would actually think, okay, well, I can trust that too, because they're both dogs, right? Okay. Then we have discrimination. And this would refer to the fact that you would learn to distinguish between the snarling pit bull and the friendly, happy, wagging tail golden retriever. Okay, you would approach them differently. We've got a German Shepherd that lives next door that is the noisiest neighbor dog I've ever had in my life. We're just so happy about that. And I'm certainly not going to approach that dog the same way. It attacks the fence at times. We've had to reinforce our fence. That was that was an expense that was kind of unplanned. But it's not a dog that I would approach like I do Seamus or even our new one, Hannah. Okay, because I discriminate between those kinds of dogs about the approach that I make. I don't expect the same rewards from petting Seamus as I would the dog next door. Okay. Now, when you think about the practical applications of this, a good way to think about this is think about how you chose a mate. That there's certain characteristics in people that that you find attractive, and yet this person or that particular husky that's getting in your face and is trying to distract you, but what the heck, why not, right? There's something that made you choose the mate that you've got. Now, maybe that mate won't last forever. We know the statistics on how successful relationships are in this country. But the fact is that at one point in time, you certainly felt like this is the person for you. I'm going to give you a good thing in the last chapter on why we choose who we do. But the bottom line is we choose our mates based on some factors that we discriminate about, that we find attractive versus unattractive. That may change as you get older. And I'm going to teach you in the last chapter good ways to not follow up failed relationships with more failed relationships. It would be a way to change the way you discriminate what your taste is in a possible mate. So there's a tease to keep you around the rest of the term, right? All right, but however you choose a dog, a car, a mate, a career, all based on discrimination factors. What is it that reinforces you? How do you narrow choices down? And one last little factor here in this section, extinction. And we're looking at the same idea here as classical conditioning. How do we extinguish this learned behavior? And of course, one of the ways that you're going to do it is when the reinforcers slow down and stop. Like old athletes, their performance finally starts going down. They say the legs are the first things to go for athletes. And, all of a sudden, their mind is getting them to a spot that they used to get to when they were younger, and their body's not getting there anymore. So the reinforcers really start becoming fewer and fewer. Okay. Same thing with gambling. If you hit a slot machine and it just doesn't pay after a while, you're finally going to go, okay, I'm tired of not rewarding. I'm going to go play another one, or I'm going to go have lunch or supper or whatever it is, whatever time of day it is. Of course, in a casino, the busiest time is between midnight and 6 in the morning. So I don't know what you'd call that meal. But that's the way that works out there. But really, extinction is, we're just looking at extinguishing some kind of behavior. However you want to do that it's going to depend on doing away with the reinforcers or applying punishment, which we're about to talk about in just a second. And it's a tricky thing to apply, but I'm going to tell you more about it in just a second. So any questions on generalization, discrimination, or extinction? How many of you are still with me? How many of you are playing with your own dogs or your kids?
We're still here.
What's that?
We're still here.
Okay, good. Thank you. I've got one person. All right. This would be the kind of thing where if we were in class, we'd just both get our own cup of coffee or whatever, or tea or whatever, and just sit around and chat a little bit. All right, but let's talk about punishment. That should wake a few people up. Some of you like punishment. That's a topic for another day. I won't go there. But punishment is another concept within operant conditioning that certainly needs to be addressed here. And keep in mind, I mentioned this a little before, punishment is an attempt to weaken or extinguish your behavior. Okay, I want you to stop. Oh, what's a good example here? I want you to stop playing in the mud. Tired of doing your laundry 3 times a day. So I'm going to punish you. Now, punishment can take the form of something physical in the form of, say, spankings or swats. How many of you actually went to school in a place where they gave swats? That you actually had a principal with a baseball bat that was a regular length baseball bat, but was sawed all the way down the middle, long ways, so it had half of it a very flat surface. And in that flat surface had been wrapped in tape with 3 holes drilled through it with a drill. And they could give you swats by swinging like a baseball bat. And that's the way, that was the world I grew up in. We got swats. Managed to avoid a lot of them, not all of them, but yeah, that was a form of punishment designed to make us stop doing whatever it was we were doing in school.
My principal in my private school, she ended up having a board that had holes in it, and she called it Big Blue.
Big Blue. Because it made people blue to get it. Yeah.
So it was pretty big.
Yeah. Yeah, it was an interesting world and all that. Now yeah, there's another thing that the coaches used to do, like in PE or whatever sport you were playing. If you did something they didn't like, they'd make you hand your own tennis shoe and bend over, and they'd swat you with your tennis shoe. And then you get home and you have this pattern of a tennis shoe on your butt. Yeah, those were the days. Yeah, when people tell you about the good old days, they'll make it sound like, oh yeah, we're so much better because we grew up like that. No, that's not necessarily true. Okay, Jaylene, I got you. Yeah. Yeah, listen, we'd get that too. We would have sometimes, like in the Army, we'd have to do push-ups. They wouldn't hit us in the Army, at least not legally. But they make us do push-ups for things like that. The 5-gallon paint stir stick. My mom used to grab everything she could get her hands on. The worst thing about my mom, I got to tell this story. She had this plastic paint brush, and it was hard plastic. And it was the way it was built. It came up to 2 sharp ridges with a valley in the middle of it. And she used to whack me with that thing. Oh my God, that hurt. That hurt worse than any other thing I ever got hurt with. That was worse than my dad's belt. And I hated that brush with a passion. One day I finally decided I'd had enough. And when she wasn't looking, I grabbed that brush on a morning, the garbage was going out during the summer, and I got it in the garbage can, and off it went in the garbage. And I'll never forget the relief I felt, although I was a little worried I could get in trouble for doing that. But she didn't catch on. She just couldn't find the brush. She never really suspected it was me. And she went and got another brush, and I remember it had a flat back to it, and she'd whack me with that, but it was nothing like that one I got rid of. That was, of all the things that I got spanked with, that was the one thing I'd say was definitely child abuse and cruel. Woo. Yeah. Yeah, that was, mom would grab anything. Dad was formal. I would get the belt with him. And so it was a little more predictable. And I think I respected that more. I didn't like it, but I respected the fact that I knew what was coming. Mom's just, ah. So, yeah, luckily she didn't hit me over the head with a chair or anything, but I guess she wasn't that strong. But, and then sometimes I actually deserved the punishment. What can I say? But yeah, so now here's the thing, and I heard this from a cop not long ago. I'd say not long ago, it's been a decade. At my age, that isn't so long ago anymore. But it was my next door neighbor was having problems with her teenage daughter. And the daughter called the cops out, like for being abused, and they came out, and I went out there because it looked like, you know, they might need my help. And so I was out there when I heard the cop telling the young lady, it says, young lady, if your mother wants to spank you or slap you with her bare hand, she's free to do so. That is very legal. Now, if she grabs a 2x4, then you can give us a call. But for what she's doing right now, nope, we're on her side. And it was kind of interesting to hear because that sure got her attention. She's like, whoa, her eyes got real big on that. And mom had never hit her with a 2x4 that I know about. But as long as you don't use something lethal, that's. Now, what I would like to tell you about behavior, about punishment, aside from all the, I'd like to laugh about it now. But the bottom line is punishment is not a very effective behavior modifier because there's certain conditions that go with it to make it effective. All right. What you've got to do to make punishment effective is to do it right after the behavior. Just like you want to give a reward right after a behavior to make sure that it strengthens the behavior, you definitely want to do a punishment right then. In fact, it's even best if you can do it right when the behavior is happening. If you have a child that's sticking their hand in the cookie jar, if you could pop that hand right there, that's where they're really going to associate the behavior with the punishment and be much more likely to not do it in the future. And you also need to do it in the right amount. If you punish too hard, then what you do is learn to avoid the punisher. When my mom would say, you wait till your dad gets home and it's morning and dad's not getting home to that evening, what am I going to learn from that? I'm going to learn to try and avoid dad when he gets home. That's not going to stop the behavior, okay? So, but if you do it too light, it's like, oh man, it makes you feel like you got away with it, If when you do the behavior, mom just goes, you stop that right now. And you go, oh, okay, mom, that you're so rough. No, that doesn't stop the behavior either. So the trick is you got to do it right away and you got to do it in the right amount or else it's not going to be very effective. Okay. Another problem with it is that it's often a bad role model. You don't teach children how to handle anger. Okay. You teach them anger. You might teach them rage. They're so angry at you. You teach fear. This little fear is natural and sometimes useful in the world, but how much of it do you want to teach in the home too? Home needs to be a safe place for the kind of things that you want a home to be. The avoidance that I mentioned, like trying to avoid things. You can teach your dog to avoid you if during house training you grab them and stick their nose in poop. Think about it, folks. Dogs like the smell of poop, but what they might learn from you forcing their heads into something is to avoid you. Is that what you want your dog to do? Now, dogs are very forgiving, but they're going to get skittish and they might not be give you that unconditional positive regard we come to love and expect from our dogs if you do things like that, okay? And another problem with punishment is it's too seldom followed by teaching the behavior that you want. Most time it's like, okay, go to your room and don't ever do that again. And now you're left with, okay, but what am I supposed to do? All right, if you do punish a child, and I'm not telling you not to, but make sure you follow it up with some teaching. It's a good teaching moment. Maybe if you can do the role model, if you can show them the behavior, this is what you do, that this will make things a lot better if you do this, then do that, okay? And of course, the worst problem with it is it can turn into abuse. And I got to tell you, child abuse is my number one reason for having my profession. If parents stop abusing children, I'll probably be out of a job. The only other reason I'd have to have it then be alcoholism and drugs and alcohol, and that would probably keep me somewhat in business. But child abuse is the number one cause of the need for people in psychology. Okay. Now, a couple more things I want to mention here on punishment. Just like with reinforcement, we have positive punishment and negative punishment. So positive punishment is the type where I follow a behavior with something negative, okay? I am going to, that you just stole a cookie, I'm going to spank you. That's positive punishment. And then we have negative punishment. And negative punishment is when your behavior is followed with removing something from you. All right, you stayed out too late, give me your phone. You can't have your phone for a week. Imagine living without your phone for a week now. We actually got that punishment when we were young, but our phones were all attached to walls or cords and they weren't mobile and you couldn't leave the house with them or anything. And but it was still punishment. But that's negative punishment is removing something from you. Positive punishment is applying something that's not very positive are pleasant for sure, but it's a positive punishment to actively do something to you. All right, any questions on punishment? Yeah, the embarrassment, that's always a good way to get somebody to run out of a room. And by the way, ladies, research shows that the type of person most likely to be embarrassed and to suffer the most embarrassment is adolescent females. So when you were a teenager, that was the worst time for you to ever get embarrassed, because you would feel it worse than anybody else and ever will again in your life. Doesn't mean you still can't get embarrassed, but I think that is one of the gifts of age. The older I get, the less embarrassed I are by my good or English or how I speak or how I act or anything. I can just laugh it off now. But when I was younger, I could definitely get embarrassed. And it's just, that's one of the gifts of age. I think every age has its gifts, and that's one of them. So, any questions on punishment? Okay, so I've actually already kind of covered this. Yeah, now one of the things to remember is, like, when you delay the punishment, you often don't get the message that the punishment is supposed to modify the behavior. How many of you have ever woke up with a hangover? I know a few of you have. That's just the nature of going to college. I know not all of you have. Some people just don't get hangovers. But think about the punishment a hangover is. That can hurt. That can be a real kind of owie kind of situation, right? Did it stop you from drinking entirely? Probably not. Because what happens is, when you first started drinking, that first little wave that alcohol gives you is kind of pleasant, right? It's like this, I needed that, man, I've been out working in the yard, I've been sweating or playing some kind of sport, and I just had a beer, and it's like, oh, that feels good. So the reinforcer you get is when you first start drinking, okay? The next morning, after you've had about 2 6-packs or a case or whatever your limit is, and you wake up, and then boom, it's like, oh, this is not going to be a good day. And sure enough, but does that stop? Does that kind of punishment really alter the behavior? No, because it doesn't come at the time that you do it. If there was a time when they had these Schick centers around. They were in Houston, but they were all over the country. And the idea behind these were to quit smoking or to quit drinking and to make them unpleasant. And they would actually bring you in if you were trying to quit drinking, and they would give you a medicine called Antabuse. You would take that first, and then they would have a complete bar set up. You could order anything you wanted. The thing is it was designed to punish your drinking immediately, because Antabuse makes you throw up violently if you throw alcohol in on top of it. So when you drank a beer, drank your Coke and rum or whatever, your Cuba Libre, and then you would just immediately start throwing up. The idea behind it was that this would help to modify the behavior. It didn't work out. You don't ever see these Schick centers anymore. They were kind of big in the 70s, but they're not around anymore. But that is one of the reasons why people who do drugs and alcohol have such trouble stopping, is because they get that immediate reinforcer. It gets, sometimes the longer they've been addicted, the quicker it gets unpleasant, but it's still not the first sensation they feel, okay? Same thing applies with obesity. By the way, I read yesterday that during this past year in the pandemic, the average weight gain for the average American is 2 pounds a month. And yeah, I'm right there too. This is about the heaviest I've ever been, and I'm going to have to do something about it soon. So, but the bottom line is let's face it, when you eat some food, especially if it's comfort food, that doesn't punish you, does it? That feels good. I found a new flavor of Bluebell. I mean, my gosh, that's just wrong. Bluebell they should just do away with Bluebell. It's just really bad. So, okay. All right, so what are some of the applications of operant conditioning? How can we use this? And this is, I find I use it, I don't want to say a lot. The older I get, the less I use it, but I still use it. I still find it useful in therapy. But I try and set people up in situations where they can get success. And if you get success, you get rewarded. People, and we like to get rewarded for success. One of the things that I would love to see our school districts move more towards is actually move backwards. There used to be a larger variety of things that you could take in schools, like wood shop and auto mechanics and home economics, they used to call it. There's so many little different skills out there that people could learn that they're just not getting in the schools anymore, because this increases the chances for a student to find an area they can be successful in. If we want to narrowly define our schools, success rate is just in the academic section of it and the grades they make, that's going to pretty narrowly define what a lot of people are going to be able to do in life. That's not going to be their métier, is the fancy word for it, but what they're going to be best at. And so they're not going to get a chance to get rewarded for things that they might really get rewarded for. But we used to have a lot more of that kind of thing. There were programs in my high school where kids would go to school just for the first half of the day, and then they would literally go to jobs to start working in areas where that's where they planned to go. They weren't really planning on college. And not every, we don't need everybody to go to college. We need people to work all the jobs, and we need to
I
respect.
think recently they just started opening technical schools. So now like you can go like for mechanics or like animal specialists and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you don't have to go to college for that.
We used to have a lot more of those too. There used to be a lot more technical schools. Now, part of the problem there was that some of them were charging large tuition and not getting people jobs. One of the things you're going to have at VTI is a very good placement program, and with a very, very high rate, incredibly high rate. In fact, the highest one of any VTI campus in the country here in Houston. You're almost guaranteed to find a job when you get out. So, but a lot of schools, they were forced to close because they were taking the money and not helping people get jobs. They weren't getting trained all that. So, but a lot of these programs that we used to be very common with, and people could take advantage of them, and graduate with a high school diploma. And they got to go in a different direction than, and I was into the academic side. That's what I wanted to do. That was my choice. And so that was open to me too. And I'd like to see it open up again as much as possible for people. I think they're going to have to get away from teaching to this test. I wasn't forced to do that. We just had to pass our courses, and we had to pass the finals and prove that we could do it in those classes. But we didn't have to hit that, run into a test or anything. And we still had to take ACTs and SATs and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm glad that some of them are still do, but I know that not all of them do. Yeah, maybe it depends on the school district and things like that. So, but I would like to see that return to all schools. They need to open that stuff up. All right, so what are some of the applications of operant conditioning? I want you to think about this for like those of you who have children. Some of you are going to have children, and some of you are not. Some of you never know when the accidents are going to happen. I'm one, so yeah, they do happen. There's John Lennon. I think I said this before in the developmental chapter, that 90% of the world's population comes out of a whiskey bottle on a Saturday night. But think of this example here. You've got a small child that's playing with blocks. And they take these 3 blocks and they put 2 of them and leave a gap. And they pick a 3rd block up and they fill the gap across it like that. And basically they discover the concept of bridge. There's just something that causes you to reach across the gap, and they say, "Mommy, look." And Mommy goes, "That's nice." And then the kid kind of gets a little bored, looks around for something to do, and the cat walks by and they grab the cat's tail. Wow, pull that tail, and the cat just freaks out, of course, and runs off. Makes a big noise though. Gets Mom's attention. Mom comes in there and says, "Why do you do that? I've told you time and time again, don't pull that cat's tail. Now leave that cat alone." Now, fast forward 5 minutes. This kid has the cat walking by again and the blocks in front of him. Which behavior do you think that child is more likely to do? Anybody want to take
Stay away.
I'm going to say the cat.
Yep.
Yeah, he's gonna mess with the cat again.
Yep, that's what it is. The cat got that got the attention. Again, attention's a powerful reinforcer. Something to remember both for training dogs and for training children is to pay attention to the good behaviors. Make sure that you reinforce them. I'll never forget I don't work with adolescents anymore, but back when I did, I went to a house that had a 15-year-old boy that was who I was seeing. I really liked him. He was a good kid. That just he was interesting to say the least. We got along good though. I turned him on to some old school music, and he liked that I did that. But I walked in one day, and he and his mom were having an argument. Mom was a single mom, 3 kids. The boy was the oldest, and he made a statement to her that I thought just showed wonderful insight and just brought her up. And she even gave me a look, and I just kind of smiled at her. What he said is, I only get attention from you when I do something negative. And it was true. And I thought, I almost laughed out loud just because he had her. He was exactly right. She tried hard. She wasn't necessarily a bad mom, but it's just that, he gave a lot of behaviors that got him negative attention for sure, but it was attention. So I've always remembered that when I talk about this, it's just an abject lesson in don't just pay attention to the negative behaviors. And if a child has a lot of them and doesn't seem to have many positive behaviors, try some new things, get them exposed to new things, find something they can enjoy, observe what it is that gives them pleasure, and maybe try and steer them that way so that they can get some more positive reinforcement. And again, this is where I get back to the schools need to open them up for students to get chances for rewards doing stuff that may not be academic. That's my soapbox for this morning. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. I'd like to thank my mother for making me possible. Yeah.
That's pretty common, right? In kids whose parents are like, not like neglectful necessarily, but they don't pay a whole lot of attention to their kids. The kids act out because they know that will get them the attention.
Yeah. See it in school too.
Yeah, I babysit my neighbor, and his parents do not pay attention to him. And every time he wants attention, he just like hits someone or does something like that.
Yeah, exactly. I'll never forget when I worked in Cypress Creek Hospital up on the north side for about 3-4 years. And there was a lady there. Again, I wasn't working with the adolescents, but I'll never forget one of the staff members, a lady who was about my age, said that, whenever they would kind of have problems where they had to do a physical takedown of an adolescent, especially the adolescent boys, it was almost like that getting them in a bear hug to hold them made them relax. It's like they just didn't get enough hugs. And that was the only way they could get one. The only way they knew how to get one was to act out. And so that could be the way that they would get that thing that we need, which again is hugging. They found out we can save a lot more premature babies with physical contact than all the science in the world when they were first doing these these premature baby wards and hooking them up to all the devices designed to keep them alive. It still wasn't working that well. And then they found out that the nurses who were sneaking in and giving them cuddles and hugs and just handling them, touching them, made a big difference, huge difference. And so now they're set up to where, even the parents can come in. Now it may be sterile and they have to do it with gloves, going through the apertures, but they're still touching the babies, and the success rate on keeping prematures alive went way up simply because of the power of touch. And so that's such a reinforcing thing that people need. And so that's kind of another good application of operant conditioning to find out what reinforces a person is also important. Something like touch is universal, but you'll find that other things are also dependent on that person. There's think about yourself. Don't you have certain things, certain foods that reinforce you that don't apply to other people? How many of you like liver? I don't either. I hate it, but I know people that love it. I'll never forget a roommate I had right after college. It was a good friend of mine. I went to the refrigerator one time and there was liver in there. So I asked him, when's he going fishing? Because that's all I ever used liver for, was to, like bait trot lines and catch catfish with. He didn't know what I was talking. What do you mean I'm going fishing? You got bait in here. What are you talking about? It's liver. Who eats liver? Well, he did. I didn't know that. So think about this though. There's certain things. I mean, even your dog might prefer certain treats over others. Seamus has a preference for chicken over beef. Chicken he'll take real quick, Beef, he'll sniff at and sometimes take and sometimes not. It's just not that reinforcing for him. So another important application when you want to use these principles on people is find out what their reinforcers are. That's going to be very important. So you got to pay attention to kids. And again, what you're talking about with babysitting the children that are neglected, that's kind of what happens. Kids don't thrive in a neglectful environment. That's a friend of mine one time, he wasn't a psychologist, but I think it's a good thought to leave you with on this class, is that when you have a child, you basically give up the next 5 years of your life until they start school. You have a total responsibility for their survival, number one, but also for instilling so many things that might help them thrive, that you give them. That you don't have a child unless you're willing to do that. And this is from a guy who'd had twins. So he had to double the fun on that in that regard. But I believe he was absolutely right. If you're going to have children, make that the main object for about the first 5 years. Now, eventually, your job is to get them ready to be independent. Don't keep treating them at 18 the same way you did when they were 4. Okay. But yeah, you can set up a good foundation by doing that and making them a priority. Hello, Hannah. Hannah had heartworm treatment this weekend, so we're trying to keep her kind of slow and calm. So far, so good though. But she came to us heartworm positive, so she got her treatments this weekend. So good to see her up and coming in to join. All right. Liver and onions. Woo. Yeah. Amanda, I understand that completely. I like to cook. I've never cooked a liver, and I'll never ruin good onions by putting it with liver. I love onions. I couldn't do that to them. All right. So any questions? I'll talk a little bit more tomorrow about the applications. And remember, the test will be now be Thursday. I know I'll finish, so we'll definitely have it on Thursday. Okay. And if I finish the chapter a little bit halfway in, I'll go ahead and start the next section, but it won't be on the test. So, but anyway, so any questions on all this good stuff? And if not, bring some tomorrow if you find that, this is still kind of confusing. But I'll see if Miss Huff or somebody can teach me how to put this up on YouTube or somewhere, or send it out on email. If there's a way to do that, I will do it. Okay, Dominica, I got you. All right, y'all. Have a good one. Have a good Tuesday. Stay safe.
Bye, Mr. Fahey. You too.
All right. Take care.
Bye. Have a nice day.
Y'all too.